Hi, welcome to Beyond the Paper Gown, where we explore the factors that impact on our health, including innovations like the one we're going to hear about today. I'm your host, Dr. Mitzi Krockover. On today's episode, we'll learn how Dr. Amy Divaraniya's own fertility struggles led her to pivot from a career in data science to launching Oova, with the mission to empower women with actionable data about their bodies through hormone monitoring. You'll hear about how Oova can be used to monitor hormones throughout a woman's cycle. The AI-powered test was developed to specifically answer questions about fertility, perimenopause, and even if the two are overlapping. However, Oova can also be used to monitor conditions like PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, and doctors can use Oova to remotely monitor their patients undergoing infertility treatments. You'll also get a peek at a future that goes beyond our current one-size-fits-all approach to medicine, especially when it comes to women and hormones. It's a future where treatments are as unique as those seeking them, and why personalized healthcare matters. It's about improving lives, one unique individual at a time. So whether you're intrigued by how you can monitor your own hormone levels to understand your body, know when you're about to ovulate, or if you're in the midst of perimenopause, or what the potentials are for this new innovation, you've landed in the right place. And just a reminder that our podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. We highly encourage you to share this information with your healthcare provider and any personal questions you might have about your healthcare needs. And finally, companies and products highlighted here should not be considered an endorsement by Beyond the Paper Gown or me. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Amy Divaraniya, who is the CEO and founder of Oova. How did someone with your background end up starting this company, and what does Oova do?
Thank you so much for having me. My background's pretty heavy on the science side. I have a PhD in biomedical sciences focusing on genetics and genomics, but I'm actually a trained data scientist and worked in industry for about 7 years before pivoting to start my own company. It's funny because I never foresaw myself being an entrepreneur. It wasn't a goal of mine. I never wanted to be my own boss. It just wasn't this itch that I needed to scratch. But what ended up happening was towards the end of my PhD, my husband and I started trying to have a baby, and it just wasn't happening for us. I've always had irregular cycles my entire life, and I realized very quickly that all the tools that were available for women were designed for a woman with a 28-day cycle or who had a regular hormone pattern. And that just wasn't me.
I would assume that that's not very many people at all, actually.
It's not. I mean, there was a study that came out showing that 87% of women did not have a 28-day cycle. And when we look at our Oova users, it's about 5% that actually do. So it's a really big disservice for women that we assume that the 28-day cycle is normal. But it really highlighted a few issues for me. One, that our medical system is incredibly broken. And second, women just aren't given the data they need to truly advocate for their own health. And I realized I couldn't solve the medical system problem on my own very quickly, but I could solve giving women data. And so I decided to start Oova. We are a women's health platform that provides women with actual hormone levels by monitoring their urine on a daily basis. And we seamlessly share that data with their doctor if they're working with one. We believe that women should have access to this data so they can understand what's going on with their bodies. Education is very critical for our platform. And it's not to school a woman. It's really to shed light on the fact that we're not taught the basics about our bodies, and yet we're taught the complete opposite, that if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant. That's absolutely not the case. So we're really trying to shatter a lot of these myths that we think are true about women's health and our bodies overall.
Take us through how someone would use this and what the information that they receive means and how they would take action on it.
Absolutely. So let me kick it off with, we actually have 2 products that are available right now. So we have this trying to conceive product, which is quite easy to understand. We identify when a woman's most fertile, we confirm that she's released an egg or not, and we provide that data to her. The second product that we have is actually helping a woman navigate the transition of perimenopause. And that is a really dark period for a lot of women because we don't know what's going on. We just know something is off. And that's really hard to come to terms with when you keep getting more and more off and you start accepting this to be normal when you're just really tired all the time or feeling sick all the time. I actually saw this billboard on the train ride into the city today. And it was by City MD saying, when you're sick and tired of feeling sick and tired, that's when you have a problem. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's what perimenopause is. You're just always feeling off. So the way that our product works, and it works the same for both platforms, but I know it's a podcast, so you can't see this, but I'll show it to you and I'll describe it. But our kit comes with a holder, a handle, and then 30 disposable cartridges that look like this. So 15 measure luteinizing hormone and progesterone, and 15 measure estrogen. Every one of our cartridges has a QR code on it. So what you do is it works alongside a smartphone app. You download the app, you enter all of your information in the app, and we figure out what days you need to scan. On a scanning day, you'll provide a urine sample on our cartridge. You then scan it with your phone. Very simple. I mean, everyone knows how to scan a QR code thanks to COVID now. And we basically give you your results within seconds.
And I should just say to our audience, it looks like a fancy pregnancy test.
Absolutely. So we did that by design because what we realized during early user testing, and this was quite a funny moment in like Oova's history, I bought a bunch of ovulation and pregnancy tests and I was still in my PhD. So I dumped it on the table. I called a bunch of my lab mates in and I was like, what do you feel about this stuff? Like, just interact with it. And there was a bunch of men and a few women. The guys open up the boxes. First thing they do is pull out that massive insert and start reading the instructions. Women grabbed the test and went to the bathroom. They knew exactly what to do. It was so
I
intuitive.
see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, because usually men don't read their instructions, but
No, they don't
this is the
usually.
one area that they did. That's great. Let me ask you a question really quickly. How does your product, and let's focus on the fertility piece just for a moment, differ from those ovulation kits?
So there's a lot of products on the market today for fertility and ovulation tracking, right? But when I was using these products, there was a lot of gaps that I identified very quickly. One, they shoehorned me into a 28-day cycle. Oova doesn't do that. We're a completely personalized test. We learn every nuance about your body and guide you through that phase of life. So what's going on with your cycle? Are you in your fertile window or not? It's different for every woman. It's not that on cycle day 14, you're going to ovulate. We're not robots.
Are you different in that because you do check every day and the other ones don't?
Well, some of them do check every day, but they're not
Okay.
quantitative tests. They're qualitative. So you're getting a binary yes or no.
Okay. And in layman's terms, explain what you just said.
Yeah, sure. So think of a pregnancy test, right? You either see two lines or you don't. You see one line or two lines. One line means you're not pregnant. Two line means you are. It doesn't matter how dark that second line is. If it's even kind of there, you're pregnant. You can't be 25% pregnant. But with Oova, we give you an actual value, a hormone measurement for all three hormones every day that you test. So I'm telling you that your luteinizing hormone is 11.27. Your progesterone is 1.46 nanograms per mil and milli-IU per liter. I'm like micro now. Milli-IU per liter for LH. And so we're really trying to be mindful of understanding what every woman's unique baseline levels are and then detecting fluctuations by comparing to that. Because our surges, our peaks are not the same from one woman to the other. And Oova learns those nuances to navigate a woman through those phases.
So it sounds like it's much more personalized.
Absolutely. That's one of our core pillars, to be a personalized asset to a woman.
Okay. How is it working? Do you have any outcomes data?
I mean, we have a ton. We've been in market since 2020. We have over 10,000 cycles that we've monitored across those years. And the stories that we hear are just so amazing. I'll give you one example. Like, a lot of these fertility companies are going to talk about like, oh, we have a 90% success rate of getting women pregnant. We can, on average, our users get pregnant within 3 months. Like, yes, we have those stats too. But what I find really encouraging and exciting is how educated women are walking away from our platform. And I'll give you a really good example. So we do these consults with our users because oftentimes they'll have questions about like, can you explain what my Oova data means? Or I saw this weird behavior. Can you help me understand it? So I take these consults often. And I was talking to one woman and she was talking about like some nuances she saw in her cycle. And she's like, when I ovulate from my right side, I have a 27-day cycle. And when I ovulate from my left, it's a 32-day cycle.
So she can feel the ovulation?
She feels the ovulation because we took away that stress point of am I ovulating or not? And she became so much more in tune with her body that she was noticing what side the pain was coming from.
Interesting.
And she had monitored for so many months that she saw that pattern. And it's critical to know this, right? Like if you're trying to get pregnant and you're assuming that you're ovulating at the 50% mark of your cycle, which is also not true. We could debunk that myth later on in the conversation. But like if your cycle is not equal one cycle to the next, you could be completely off assuming that it is.
Before we go further, it might be useful to go through a review of the menstrual cycle, and I'll try not to get too technical. There are 4 phases to the menstrual cycle, and there is a communication system between the uterus and ovaries and parts of the brain that act as the control center, which receives and sends signals to the uterus and ovaries. It's a very intricate system, but for our purposes here, these are the cliff notes. The first phase is considered the menstrual phase. If there is not a pregnancy, estrogen and progesterone levels are low, and that results in shedding the lining of the uterus. That's the menstrual period. During this time, that control center in your brain notices that it's time to start over and sends a signal in the form of FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, to prepare new eggs. The control center keeps sending the FSH signal to make sure the eggs are getting ready for one of them to break from the follicle. This is called the follicular phase, and follicles are the small fluid-filled sacs in the ovary. Each one contains one immature egg. During each cycle, a dominant egg emerges and sends out its own estrogen. So FSH is rising, and now so is estrogen. When the estrogen signal gets really strong, it tells the control center that a dominant egg is ready. The control center then sends out a super strong signal. This is the LH surge, or the luteinizing hormone, that tells the egg it's time to leave the ovary and start the journey down the fallopian tube toward the uterus. This is called ovulation and the prime time for fertilization with sperm. After the egg is on its way, the empty follicle starts making its own signals with progesterone and a little estrogen to further build up that uterine lining to make it friendly to a fertilized egg, should there be one. This also tells the brain that it doesn't need to send out any more of its signals and that LH and FSH levels will start falling. If the egg and sperm meet and therefore a pregnancy occurs, the uterus continues to send out progesterone and estrogen, making it more conducive for that fertilized egg to implant in the uterus. If there's no fertilization, the hormone levels decrease and the cycles start again. So for someone who's looking to get pregnant, for example, they're going to want to know when the LH surges, or better yet, when it's about to surge, as that will be the most fertile time. Now, we'll go back to the discussion. I asked Dr. Divaraniya about any data she had with respect to results for women who use the test. And going back, what are your numbers in terms of statistics?
So you're talking about success regarding pregnancy, or, I mean, so we on average, our users are getting pregnant within 3 months. And then I don't want to give you a percentage of success on pregnancy because that's not the only reason women are using us. So it's a bit different. We're not an ovulation test. We're really a hormone monitoring device.
Okay.
So I'll give you another example here. But we have women that conceive with Oova, right? And what happens is, while we're not a pregnancy test monitor, we are able to detect a pregnancy really early on because luteinizing hormone and beta-HCG are very similar in structure. They only vary off of one antibody site. So our luteinizing hormone antibody actually binds to the beta HCG. So we have that non-specific binding happening on our test. It's not a problem because that hormone is not present unless if you're pregnant, right? But what we'll start to see is that the woman has her LH surge, and then she starts to see her progesterone rise, and the LH starts to come back down, right, as it's supposed to. But then in a couple of days, the LH will start to pick back up, and the progesterone is also staying elevated. So we get flagged when we see that pattern because we're like, oh, something's up with this patient's test. So sometimes we'll reach out and we're like, hey, you may want to go get a pregnancy test. And we find out, oh no, I am pregnant. Oova got me pregnant, but I've struggled with recurring miscarriage. And I want to make sure that the pregnancy gets through the first trimester. So they continue using Oova to just get that peace of mind that their progesterone is staying elevated and their LH is staying up.
Is that as good a test, or how does that compare with doing a beta HCG level?
You would absolutely want to do a beta HCG level because your levels for beta HCG, like both progesterone and beta HCG, are going to be way over what Oova can monitor. And in fact, they are breaking our test because the dye from the control line is being pulled into the LH and the progesterone reading. So the test is not even reading properly. Like they're getting an error, but they're getting that peace of mind that my levels are still high and I'm not miscarrying right now. We're not trying to replace like what getting a beta HCG or a normal blood test or doing the right things, but it speaks to how scared women are on this journey and how much they're hungry for some solace, and we're providing that.
And just to explain to our audience, when there is a question about miscarrying or the early pregnancy, a blood test that looks at basically the pregnancy hormone, you can actually do levels of it to see if it's increasing in the right amount. And so that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I'll reiterate that Oova is not designed to confirm or deny that a miscarriage is happening. It's just a nice tool to get some soft confirmation. It's never meant to replace any sort of medical advice.
Thank you. Does anyone ever use it for contraception?
We like to say that it's for off-label use. It's an off-label use of the product because with everything that we put out there for Oova, we have done studies to confirm that our results are accurate. We have not done sufficient studies to say that we're an effective contraceptive.
And before we jump over to the perimenopause information, with everything going on with Dobbs, there has been a real focus on privacy, especially with these reproductive health apps, because even if they are HIPAA compliant, which is the law that protects patient privacy, many of them are not. I don't know if yours is, you'll tell me. But even when they are, if there was a government entity that, wanted to, file a criminal offense, then they would have access to that data. So tell us about your approach to privacy.
Sure. So let's go back to when Dobbs was overturned. It happened on a Friday, and if you remember, that weekend it was a frenzy on social media with all these companies putting out announcements that we are working to ensure your data is secure. And I remember looking at those messages and I was like, "Wow, you guys really suck! Like, how much data are you holding on to that you've just kind of been biding time, not ensuring that it was secure?" And women didn't think to ask. Even I'm guilty of that. Like, sure. I didn't think to ask the app that I was tracking on if my data was secure. So, like, we had a moment there where I was like, either we join this conversation or we stay silent. Because Oova didn't have to do anything. We have been HIPAA compliant and secure from the very beginning. It's like, it was a foundation. My PhD work used a lot of EHR records. So it was just like when you're building a database, you have to ensure. Right. It was dealing with medical records. So I was like, when you create a database, you need to ensure it's secure. And so that's what we did. It wasn't an afterthought for us. And so we stayed quiet during that frenzy. And we were getting a lot of messages from potential customers and current customers. Is my data secure? Can you delete my account? I'm no longer using it. And I was like, I'm happy to do whatever you need, but I can ensure you that your data is secure. And then regarding the subpoenas that you could possibly get when you're using a fertility tracking app, the reason I can't necessarily tell you what our absolute success rate is because we don't keep record of whether a woman conceived or not in our system. We do that by design because we, again, are not an ovulation test. We are a hormone monitoring platform. And so what I care about are what the hormone levels are. And like, fine, we have what your health goal may be, but it's not tied to a specific person. It's completely de-identified. And that
Really?
key
Okay.
that maps everything is under lock and key. So I can't map it for anyone.
So if someone, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds of this, but if there was a subpoena for patient A, you can't go
Mhm.
into her file to see what her hormone levels have been?
It depends on how deep that subpoena is, but just if they were like, I need the medical records of so and so, it would be a huge lift for us to be able to map that out. And then what are you getting? You are getting a bunch of hormone levels.
Okay.
I don't have anything on whether the woman conceived or not. I don't have anything about whether the pregnancy was terminated. We don't
It would,
keep record of any of that.
and given what we just talked about, even if they might have conceived, it would be an indirect measure. So it doesn't, unless somebody was really
Exactly.
sophisticated, they may not be able to know. Okay.
Exactly.
It's a shame that we have to be having this conversation, but unfortunately, it's certainly something that's very important. And to remind our listeners that when they're giving their data, they really need to know how it's being protected and if it's being
I,
protected.
I agree with you. Like, I think it's unfortunate that we have to have that conversation, but in a way, it's like, spin it to a positive too, right? I think women's health has always been kind of this cursory thing that women's health is all period tracking. And like, fine, that's the easiest app because it's so predictable, but it's really not. It's still health data. And for these companies to be under fire and now have the bar set at you need to be HIPAA compliant, I think that's a fantastic step forward for women's health. I'm like, we don't want to make this a political discussion, but I think the positive that came out of this is that now even period tracking apps are being treated like health platforms. That's a huge step for us.
And to the end that you are collecting large amounts of data that really paints a more detailed picture of what is and isn't normal. Most of what we consider not normal is actually normal.
Yeah.
How do you contribute to the data out there so that scientists and others can benefit from it, and ultimately, women in general can benefit from it?
Absolutely. It's one of our massive pillars because while we're trying to inform a woman about her body, we're also trying to myth bust a lot of these assumptions that we have around women's health. It is horrible that we all think that the 28-day cycle is normal. It's not. That was a marketing ploy that became basic healthcare. I think that's just how a lot of women's health has been
Sure.
handled. And so what we do is, yes, we have an amazing data set, and I can talk about that data set a bit more. But with over 10,000 cycles, what we do is actually release, we publish and we present at some of the leading medical conferences about the data that we're collecting, because it's not necessarily just for the consumer. It's also for the medical community to understand that we now have actual hormonal data over time to understand the nuances of every woman, because the dynamic has drastically changed. Women are not in their early 20s getting pregnant anymore. The age of pregnancy, first pregnancy, is drastically increasing. And if you look at our users, 46% are above the age of 35. Almost half of our users, and this is just for the trying to conceive demographic, are over the age of 35. That says a lot, right? We
Absolutely.
can't compare that woman to an 18-year-old who has
Sure.
a typical cycle. A lot has happened in those years that will impact her cycle. So we're really trying to educate both the consumer and the medical community about what normal looks like. And we work with REIs or reproductive endocrinologists quite a lot. They're very aware of the abnormalities in women, and they embrace it because those are the cases that they see most often.
Sure.
OBGYNs, I think, are in need of data, but the only way to get that data is to have a patient come in every day for blood work. And unless if you're going through IVF, you're not going into the clinic every day.
And to that point, can you use this modality with IVF, or instead of having to go each day to getting your blood drawn?
To being used across IVF, I'm going to honestly say no, not at the
Okay.
moment, because our estrogen test doesn't reach the levels that women are typically going to see when they're going through an IVF cycle. So I don't want to mislead anyone there. But what we can be used for are any non-gonadotropin cycle. So that could be a natural FET or a natural frozen embryo transfer, a natural cycle, an IUI, trigger shot monitoring. There's a whole slew of things that you can use Oova for today. And it is being used in that way. We're actually kicking off a study with Mass General in the next few weeks looking at using Oova for looking at Oova for trigger shot monitoring.
And what
And
does
that
that
should
mean?
be really exciting. Sure. So when you're going through an IVF cycle, think about who's going through an IVF cycle, right? It's not always a woman who's been medically trained. And they have to give themselves injections and medications. It's a very scary thing, especially cycle one.
Mhm.
But one of the first steps that a lot of clinics make their patients do is give themselves or self-administer a trigger shot, which is often a beta HCG shot, and that's to induce ovulation. So what they're trying to do with an IVF cycle is override your natural cycle and put you into like a controlled and predicted cycle. So the trigger shot is meant to induce ovulation so that when you come in for a retrieval of your egg, you have ovulated and they can extract the egg so they can create the embryo outside and then do a transfer at some other date. Well, the problem is that a lot of women who are self-administering that trigger shot don't know if they're doing it right. And in many cases, the clinic won't know that the shot wasn't administered right until the patient comes in for a retrieval. And now, if that shot wasn't administered correctly, that cycle is a waste,
Okay, so you're basically
right?
being able by a hormonal level to see if they had done it correctly.
Correct. So
Okay.
you get a baseline, you monitor the day of the shot and the day after the shot to ensure that
Wow,
the test was done properly.
fascinating.
And
That,
the beauty is that your doctor gets your data in real time through our HIPAA compliant dashboard. So you don't need to send screenshots or images to your doctor. They can see it all in real time, and the nurse can call you the next day saying, "Hey, doesn't look like the shot was administered right. Come in," and we can do it, and you're still on cycle.
so obviously you're a consumer product, but when it's used in this way, is it paid for by insurance?
Not at the moment. We're working on it.
Okay. Let's switch a little bit and talk about how you might use this for, or if you have a different kind of measurement for someone who thinks they might be in perimenopause.
Sure. So what's happening in perimenopause? The bottom line is that there's a hormonal imbalance that's happening, which is causing all of these symptoms. The problem is we don't understand that hormonal imbalance. We don't even understand the symptoms. We just know that they exist. And we don't know if when we're experiencing those symptoms, if they're for perimenopause or because I'm feeling sick or I'm coming down with something or I just didn't get enough sleep. It's very ambiguous. So what we're trying to do here is I don't want to say forget the symptoms, but put less emphasis on the subjective piece of it. And let's get to the objective component, which is the hormone balance. Let's monitor your hormones across 15 or 30 days, depending on where you are in your cycle, and figure out if there is a hormonal imbalance happening or not. Is your estrogen behaving the way it should? Is your progesterone staying super elevated? Is it being brought down? What is going on? Because there's a reason it's called a menstrual cycle. These hormones work in unison and in harmony together. So if something is off, it's going to cause a downstream effect. And that is what leads to those symptoms. So the way that we're using Oova for perimenopause is understanding that hormonal imbalance. And then we also allow women to track their symptoms to layer that information on top of that hormone imbalance to figure out what the causal nature is. My PhD work was done in Bayesian networks, so it's all about causality. That's where my head always goes. So we're trying to see what that hormone pattern is that's causing you to experience certain symptoms, and then start shedding light on that. One of the questions that women typically ask us is, "Am I in perimenopause?" That is a very tricky and multifaceted question to answer. I don't want to say that we can absolutely 100% answer that today, but what we can do is give you information to start teasing out what is happening on a day-to-day basis. And that control is what I believe and what we're seeing women are really hungry for today.
You know, it's interesting because if you look at guidelines for clinicians, if you talk to a clinician, they'll say, you don't need any hormone test. We're going to treat you, or you have the option to be treated if you have symptoms. What do you think it's going to take for a test like yours to be included as part of the diagnostic process? And what do you say to those clinicians who say, we really don't need that kind of monitoring?
We'd have this conversation every day with clinicians, right? Because it's about changing a behavior. That is the hardest thing to do, right? Humans don't want to change, and they don't welcome change. But my challenge is, I understand you don't look at hormone data and blood work right now, but why is that? Is it because you don't need it, or is it because you don't have it? And the answer is that they don't have it.
What do you mean when they say don't have it? Because we can take estrogen levels, but what I was always taught is you really can't correlate those levels with what's going on in any kind of concrete way.
Are you getting those levels daily, or are you getting that in a snapshot?
It's a spot check. Exactly.
That's exactly it. These hormones they're not stagnant hormones. They're fluctuating every single day and every hour. So being able to see your hormone trends over time is the true value of our platform. And that is information that a clinician hasn't had. Because like I said earlier, a woman is not going into the doctor every day for blood work unless if she's going through a really invasive treatment. Like, what I'm excited about is this new technique of being able to get daily hormone measurements can actually start supporting clinicians and women to get the right dosage and treatment for hormone replacement therapy. Right now, it's like this blanket, no, don't do it because I'm going to get cancer. But why is that? It's because the dosage isn't right and the monitoring isn't done correctly, because clinicians and women don't want to get blood draws all the time. But if I can provide you with that data daily by just using a urine test, wouldn't you prefer that?
Just to be clear, though, we don't have guidelines for that. We don't have data for that and all of that. But what I'm hearing you say is that's the holy grail. That's, the goal.
That's the next step. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I'm not saying that we have to change like the way that treatment is done. We don't have enough data for it yet. But that's what we're trying to do here at Oova. We're trying to collect that data to have those meaningful conversations with clinicians. And how do we do that? By publishing research, by showing our findings, not coming up with arbitrary, like gimmicky scores or some marketing material. We're really trying to move science in the medical field forward. And the only way that I know how to do that is with data.
Absolutely. And so just to, again, if I'm hearing you correctly, or if I'm understanding correctly, a woman who might be experiencing some symptoms, but isn't ready to go to the doctor yet, or just really wants to have a little bit more information, this is the kind of person that might use your test and get some more data. If it is looking like, it's perimenopause, then they can come in with that data and say, hey, I need to have that conversation. Or if it's not, then they obviously need to go further to see why some of their symptoms are occurring. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a completely fair assessment. And I mean, just think about the change in mentality between those two women, right? One who's able to get the answers that she needs from our test, great, she's walking away confident. Another woman who has to walk into her doctor's office because she doesn't necessarily have the answers or to her questions, but she has data to walk in with and being like, can you explain what's going on with me? Because something is clearly off. You're not walking in lost. And I'll leave it at that.
And given that it's not reimbursed right now, is it FSA or HSA eligible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that's one way that people can help afford it. So here's my question. You just said earlier that you've got a big percentage of people that are 35 and over trying to get pregnant. And that's hard because, for all the reasons we know, as we get older, it becomes more hard to conceive or more difficult to conceive. And you're now kind of in that space, especially if you're 40 and above, maybe getting into perimenopause. And for anybody who's heard my podcasts, they've heard me say, I was in perimenopause when I had or I think I slid into it after my second baby at the age of 41. And so talk a little bit about, are you using both tests, or how would you suggest someone who is in that kind of gray area and having difficulty if they're trying to conceive? How would you approach that?
That is a great question. And it's funny because I got this like pushback early on when I was sharing with investors and potential investors like what my goal was for the company, that we aren't like, don't look at me as an ovulation test or fertility femtech company or a fertility test, because we're scaling across other women's health areas. And the pushback that I got from potential investors was, how are you, like, you're talking about two very different consumers. Like, you're talking about a young woman who's trying to get pregnant and an elderly person who's going through perimenopause.
An elderly person.
Going to have what's, yes, yes, exactly.
I have a problem with that, but okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I did too, which is why they were potential investors and not current. I really did too. And I've walked away from a lot of tables because of that sentiment, because I'm like, you're just so disconnected with the reality. And if it's okay, I'd like to read a quote from a woman. I did a consult with her and she made a statement to me. She said, "I love how Oova acknowledges and supports both the trying to conceive and perimenopause journeys, recognizing the challenges women face. Oova is highlighting the continuity of these experiences rather than viewing them as separate paths." And like that, when she said that to me, it resonated so deep, because I'm like, yes, our average woman who's trying to get pregnant is over the age of 35. And when you look at the average age of a woman who is going through perimenopause or buying our test, she's 41.
That's right.
This is not an old woman.
Exactly.
Right?
I loved it when I was 36 and had my first child, and I was considered a geriatric, pregnancy.
Yes.
Even the way that we talk about it.
That's another whole study that we actually presented about, like, what advanced maternal age actually means and looks like. So it's very
say a little bit about that. What does it
so
mean?
we actually did a study because we assumed that if you're of advanced maternal age, you're going to have trouble getting pregnant or more difficulty getting pregnant, right? 35 is that magic pivoting age. And there's absolutely some science to this, right? That like the rates of infertility increase as you're getting older, and it gets more difficult to get pregnant. But what we started looking at is, what are the actual hormone patterns in the younger age group versus the older? And there's not that much difference. Like, these women are still cycling. It's just slightly more irregular, and it's coming off as infertility because they're using these over-the-counter tests that are designed for a 20-year-old woman. But if you look at their actual hormone levels, they are still cycling. You just need to understand that woman.
Do you know if you are more effective because of that?
I believe so. I mean, we have all the success stories and all of that, like most other companies. But what I think is amazing is we're able to provide that individualized care, and we're not dumping you into or trying to shove you into this like cookie cutter mold. We're really embracing your individuality. So this is really what spearheaded us really launching in perimenopause sooner than we thought. We had so many women that were telling us they were trying to conceive, but then also telling us that they had perimenopause. I was like, you're 37. Like, why do you, like, whatever, let's just go with it. And they were being told that they were in perimenopause because they were a little bit older and they had an irregular cycle. That's not perimenopause, right? Yeah. So that end happened. And then on the flip side, we have women who are like 41, 42, who are still trying to have a baby. Right. There's nothing wrong. You're still cycling, but they're using our perimenopause test to see if they're cycling or not. So the beauty of our platform is a woman basically goes into our app and selects what her health goal is. And then the entire app experience changes based off of that. The data is the same. It's a quantitative test. So your estrogen level, your progesterone, those are all the same, whether you're using a fertility or a perimenopause kit. But the interpretation is very different.
Sure. What did you have to go through any kind of regulatory approval for your product? And I would assume if you did, for the claims that you're providing.
Yeah, sure. So we fall under a class 1 exempt device. So we have registered with the FDA. We've done all the things that we need to do on that front, and we're really conscious about the claims that we make. So it's a bit hard for us because we can detect signs of like polycystic ovarian syndrome, but we can't tell a woman that she has that. What we can do is provide that insight to her physician or her clinician if she's working with one of our providers, who can then use Oova's recommendation to do a workup on her. But we don't prescribe or diagnose a patient based off of any of our data.
Okay. How do you get to that physician?
We have a clinician dashboard that clinicians can log into to view their patients' data. And so we have a network of over 100 clinics that have partnered with us. They range from naturopaths to OBGYNs to fertility centers. And basically what happens is when you have a patient that's using Oova, they can go into their app and select what clinics they want to have access to their data. So the patient drives all of it. Once they select the clinic will be able to view that patient's data in their dashboard. The doctor is also able to add a patient, but the patient has to opt into it.
Of course.
So again, the patient controls access to whoever sees their data.
Terrific. What do you see for the near future with Oova?
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting right now. I mean, we launched our perimenopause product, never expected it to take off the way it did. It just really reinvigorated our entire team and reminded us of how important the work that we're doing is and how hungry people are for this information. So we've really like kind of hit the ground running, thinking about like what's next. We are not limiting ourselves to just these two phases. The goal has always been to scale across all different phases of women's lives. We like to think of our platform as Oova for life. So regardless of where you are in your life journey, we will have a platform available to you to help navigate that.
And as we're wrapping up, what did I not ask you that you wanted to make sure that we discussed?
One thing that I think we should definitely address is the feeling that women have about medical gaslighting. And I mean, I've experienced it myself as well, like going to my clinician at 30, how old was I? I was 27 and I was just starting my PhD and I was like, I have an irregular cycle. I don't want to get pregnant now, but what can I do to optimize my chances of getting pregnant? She looked me up and down once and was like, come back to me at 30 if you're not pregnant. I was like, well, I'm asking how to be proactive and you're literally not giving me anything when I know I'm going to have trouble, which I did have trouble. I never went back to that OB again. But there's this sentiment that women aren't taken seriously when they walk into their clinician's office.
And I just want to interrupt for just a second because you just, it's very interesting. I think most of us, when we think about this issue, we think about a male physician, but you just gave us an example of a female physician. So
yes,
it's potentially gender neutral, right?
Agreed. It is. And exactly. You would hope that a female clinician would be a little bit more sympathetic and understanding, but like I understand the medical side of it too. An OB has 7 minutes with you. She wants you in and out. So if she can get you out in 6 minutes, she gets a minute to breathe. So I get that. But as a patient, it's not the best experience. So if you take a couple of steps back from that journey of me actually walking to the doctor's office, what did it take me to get into that office? If my son has a cough, we're going to the pediatrician. If my husband says that his shoulder hurts, I'm making him an appointment with the PT. I can be going through so much stuff, but until it becomes debilitating, I'm not walking into that doctor's office because there's so much other stuff I'm monitoring on a day-to-day basis. I'm always the last priority. So if I dragged myself to a clinician's office because something was bothering me so much to have to go to a doctor, and then I get feedback like this, that's incredibly disheartening. So I took that feeling and I was like, how do I build that into a product that women never have to experience that again? And so what we've done with Oova is everything, as I've been saying, is based on hormone levels. So if I can give you a report to take to your doctor where they say, okay, XYZ is wrong with you, you can be like, okay, great, I hear you, but how does that relate to my hormone trends? Let me speak your language. And now all of a sudden we've opened up a two-way conversation with your doctor. It's not one-sided anymore, and you're being heard. So that's like really the ultimate goal of our platform here.
Powerful statement. You mentioned that your son, so I assume that you were ultimately successful.
I was, yes. I had a beautiful baby boy who was so good that during my mat leave, whatever you consider a founder's mat leave to be, I was bored because he was so good. And we
Oh,
ended up we ended up doing a beta test, and the feedback that I got then was just amazing. Like it built Uva to what it is today, and he has been really a core component of this company, to the point where, like, I mean, as a mom and as a founder, like, there's a lot of guilt that you're kind of juggling on both sides, right? Because both things are your babies. And so there's this one moment that we had where my friend asked him, "So what do you do? Like, what does your mom do for work?" And this is definitely like during COVID, like where he's seen me on computers all day. I thought my little 3-year-old at the time was going to say something like, "Oh, my mom sits on the computers on Zoom all day." And he paused and he says, "My mom helps other families have babies."
okay.
And
So he's
I just,
brilliant too.
I mean,
Oh
he's
my God,
just,
that's a great story.
it, it just warmed my heart so much. And I was like, man, I'm doing something right. And
Absolutely. Look what you
I'm
have
raising a
done.
son who thinks it's appropriate for his mom to work this hard and to make a difference in the world.
Oh, that is a terrific story. Thank you for sharing that with us. What's his name?
His name is Aryan.
Arian. I love that. Well, Dr. Amy Divaraniya, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise and your innovative spirit. I think that this was really educational and empowering. So thank you so much for being with us, and we'll look forward to following the company as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great chatting with you.
As we wrap up today's enlightening conversation with Dr. Amy Divaraniya, it's clear we're standing on the threshold of a new era in women's health. The work being done at Oova, tracking a woman's daily hormone levels, opens up a world of possibilities, not just for women interested in fertility or navigating perimenopause, but for anyone who dreams of a healthcare system that sees and treats them as an individual. This conversation doesn't have to end here, so I hope you'll share this episode with friends and family, spark your own discussions, and keep the dialogue going. Please comment on our social media or drop us a line at info@womancentered.com or on our forum at beyondthepapergown.com. While you're there, subscribe to our newsletter for the latest on our episodes, articles, women's health news and activities, and more. And follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. And don't forget to subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for tuning in, for sharing your time with us, and for being part of this important conversation. Until next time, take good care. Our episode was produced by Patrick Shambayati and me, and our associate producer is Kyla McMillian.